The lantern light caught her face first, a pale oval framed by tangled dark hair, and Kyle Sanders stopped dead in the doorway of his stable with his heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted to escape. She was curled in the hay of the far stall with two small children pressed against her sides, all three of them so still he thought for one terrible moment they might be dead, until the woman's chest rose with a shallow breath. It was Saturday morning in late April of 1878, and Kyle had come out to his stable in San Antonio, Texas, to check on his mare who was due to foal any day. Instead, he found three strangers sleeping in his hay, their clothes dusty and worn, their faces smudged with dirt and exhaustion. The woman's arm was wrapped protectively around a boy who looked to be about 5 years old, and on her other side, a girl of maybe 3 slept with her thumb in her mouth. Kyle set the lantern down carefully on a hook and approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. As he drew closer, he could see that the woman's dress had been mended in several places, the fabric faded from what might have once been blue to a tired gray. Her shoes, visible beneath the hem of her skirt, were worn through at the toes. The children were in similar condition, their clothes clean but patched, their faces thin. He cleared his throat softly. The woman's eyes flew open, and she sat up so fast that she startled both children awake. Her hand went to her chest, and Kyle saw real fear flash across her face. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please, we will leave right now. I am so sorry. We just needed somewhere safe for the night." Kyle held up his hands, palms out. "Easy now. Nobody is throwing anyone out into the dark." The boy started to cry, a quiet whimpering sound that tore at Kyle's chest. The woman pulled him close, stroking his hair with trembling fingers. The little girl just stared at Kyle with enormous gray eyes. "When did you last eat?" Kyle asked. The woman's chin came up, pride flashing in her eyes despite the desperation written all over her. "We are fine. We will be on our way." "That was not what I asked." Kyle kept his voice gentle. "When did you last eat?" She looked down at the children, and something in her seemed to crumble. "Thursday," she whispered. "We had some bread on Thursday." Kyle felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at whatever circumstances had brought a woman and 2 small children to sleep in a stranger's stable without food for 2 days. He stood up and gestured toward the house. "Come on. Let us get some food into all of you." "We cannot impose," the woman said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You are not imposing. I am offering." Kyle reached down and lifted the little girl before the woman could protest. The child was light as a bird, and she settled against his shoulder with a sigh that suggested she was used to being carried. "What is your name?" "Emily," the girl whispered. "That is a pretty name. I am Kyle." He looked at the woman. "You coming, or are you going to make me come back for you too?" That got the ghost of a smile from her. She stood, pulling the boy up with her, and followed Kyle across the yard to his house. It was not much, just a simple ranch house with 3 bedrooms and a kitchen, but it was clean and warm, and most importantly, it had food. Kyle set Emily down at the kitchen table and immediately went to the stove, stirring up the coals and adding wood. The woman hovered near the door like she might bolt at any moment, the boy clinging to her skirts. "Sit," Kyle said, pointing at the chairs. "Please." She sat slowly, pulling the boy onto her lap. Kyle could feel her watching him as he moved around the kitchen, slicing bread and cheese, pouring milk into 3 cups. He set the food in front of them and watched as both children looked up at their mother for permission before reaching for it. "Go ahead," she said softly, and they ate with the careful restraint of children who had learned not to waste a crumb. Kyle poured coffee for himself and the woman, then sat across from her. "I am Kyle Sanders. This is my ranch about 3 miles outside San Antonio proper." "Martha," she said after a moment. "Martha Dawson. This is Samuel, and you have already met Emily. Pleased to meet you all, even under strange circumstances." Kyle took a sip of his coffee. "What brings you to San Antonio, Martha?" Her hands tightened around her cup. "We are traveling." "Looking for work. Where is your husband?" Something shuddered in her expression. "Dead, 6 months ago. Fever took him." "I am sorry." Kyle meant it. He knew what it was like to lose someone. His own wife had died 3 years back in childbirth, along with their son. The grief had nearly killed him too, but the ranch had given him something to focus on, a reason to get up every morning. "Family?" She shook her head. "No one. We were living in Dallas, but the landlord sold the building. I could not afford another place, not and feed the children too. I thought maybe San Antonio would have more opportunities." Kyle studied her in the lamplight. She could not have been more than 25, with clear gray eyes and a straight nose. Even exhausted and dirty, there was a dignity to her, a strength that showed in the set of her shoulders and the way she looked him directly in the eye when she spoke. The children were well behaved and clean despite their circumstances, which told him something about the kind of mother she was. An idea was forming in his mind, crazy and impulsive and completely unlike him. Kyle was known around San Antonio as a steady man, reliable and careful in his decisions. But looking at Martha Dawson and her 2 children, he felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen since Sarah died starting to thaw. "I have a proposition," he said slowly. "You need a home. These children need stability. I need help running this ranch. I cannot pay much, but you would have a roof over your heads and food to eat." Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of help?" "Cooking, cleaning, mending. Basic household work. I can manage the ranch side of things, but I am not much good at keeping a house." He gestured around the kitchen, which was functional but sparse. "It would be honest work for honest pay. Why would you offer this to a stranger?" Her voice was suspicious, and Kyle could not blame her. She was a woman alone with 2 children. She had every right to be cautious. "Because you need it, and I can help." Kyle met her gaze steadily. "Because I have more space than I need and no one to share it with. Because those children deserve better than sleeping in stables." Martha bit her lip, looking down at Samuel, who had finished his bread and was starting to nod off in her lap. What would people say? A widow woman living in your house? That was the crux of it, Kyle knew. Even with the best intentions on both sides, people would talk. San Antonio was not a huge city, but the ranching community around it was tight-knit, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. A single man and a single woman living under the same roof would set tongues wagging within a day. The crazy idea that had been forming crystallized into something concrete. "Then we should make it respectable," Kyle heard himself say. "Marry me." Martha's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me?" Kyle repeated, his heart racing but his voice steady. "Tomorrow is Sunday. We could go into town after church services, make it legal. You would have security, the children would have a home and a father, and no one could say a word against it. You do not even know me." Martha's voice was faint. "I could be anyone. A thief, a liar. Are you? No. Then I know enough." Kyle leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "Look, I am not promising love or romance. I am offering a practical arrangement between 2 people who need each other. You need protection and security. I need someone to help make this house a home again. We could do right by each other, Martha. What do you say?" She looked at him for a long moment, and Kyle could see the thoughts racing behind her eyes. She was calculating, weighing risks and benefits, trying to figure out if he was genuine or if this was some kind of trap. He kept his expression open, letting her look her fill. Finally, she glanced down at her children. Emily had fallen asleep with her head on the table, and Samuel was snoring softly in Martha's lap, Whatever she saw in their faces seemed to decide her. "All right," she whispered. "All right, yes, I will marry you." Kyle let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Good. That is good." He stood up, suddenly aware of how strange this all was, how quickly everything had changed. 12 hours ago, he had been a solitary rancher with a simple routine. Now he was about to become a husband and father to 2 children. "Let me show you where you can sleep tonight. We will figure out the rest in the morning." He carried Emily while Martha brought Samuel, and he led them to the spare bedroom he kept for the occasional visitor. It had a double bed with clean sheets and a small window that looked out over the eastern pasture. Martha laid Samuel down carefully and took Emily from Kyle, settling the little girl beside her brother. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," Kyle said, gesturing to the washstand in the corner. "Privy is out back. I will be in the room across the hall if you need anything." "Kyle," Martha said, and he paused in the doorway. "Thank you. I do not understand why you are doing this, but thank you." "We all need help sometimes," Kyle said simply. "Sleep well, Martha." He closed the door and went to his own room, but sleep was a long time coming. He lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around him, and wondered what on earth he had just done. Proposing marriage to a woman he had known for less than 2 hours was the act of a madman. But when he thought about sending Martha and those children back out onto the road, something in him rebelled absolutely. They belonged here. He could not explain it, could not rationalize it, but he knew it bone deep. Morning came bright and clear. Kyle woke early from habit and went out to check on the animals. The mare was fine. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the far pasture, and the chickens needed feeding. He was gathering eggs when he heard the screen door creak and looked up to see Martha standing on the porch. She had washed her face and hands and attempted to tame her hair into a bun at the nape of her neck. In the morning light, she looked younger, almost fragile, and Kyle felt a rush of protectiveness so strong it nearly staggered him. "Good morning," he called. "There is coffee on the stove if you want some." Martha came down the porch steps, wrapping her arms around herself. "The children are still sleeping. I did not want to wake them yet. Let them rest. They must be exhausted." Kyle finished with the eggs and walked over to her. "Are you having second thoughts about what we talked about last night?" She met his eyes. "Are you?" "No. Then neither am I." She took a breath. "But I think we should be clear about expectations. This is a practical arrangement, as you said. I will keep your house and care for your home. You will provide for me and the children. But sleeping arrangements I would prefer to keep separate for now. Is that acceptable?" Kyle felt relief wash through him. He had been wondering how to broach that subject. "More than acceptable. The spare room is yours for as long as you want it." "I would never force myself on you, Martha. Never." Some of the tension went out of her shoulders. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment in the growing light, 2 strangers about to bind their lives together, and Kyle felt the weight of it. But he also felt something else, something tentative and fragile but real. Hope, maybe. The possibility that life might hold something good again. "I should start breakfast," Martha said. "If that is all right." "That would be wonderful." Kyle handed her the basket of eggs. "I will be in shortly. Just need to check the fence line in the north pasture." She nodded and went back into the house. Kyle stood watching until the door closed behind her, then turned and headed out to check his fences with his mind full of thoughts about the future. When he came back an hour later, the smell of bacon and eggs and fresh biscuits met him at the door. The kitchen table was set for 4, and Samuel and Emily were sitting quietly with clean faces and combed hair. Martha was at the stove, and she looked up when he entered. "Perfect timing," she said. "Everything is ready." They ate together, the children gradually losing some of their shyness and actually smiling when Kyle made a joke about the chickens staging a revolution. After breakfast, Kyle helped Martha clear the dishes while the children played quietly in the corner with some old wooden toys he dug out of a chest. "I will hitch up the wagon," Kyle said. "Church starts at 10, and we should get there a bit early to talk to Pastor Williams." Martha nodded, smoothing down her dress self-consciously. "I wish I had something better to wear." "You look fine," Kyle meant it. She might not be dressed in fancy clothes, but she carried herself with a grace that no amount of finery could improve. "Martha." "Yes, this is going to work out." "I promise you that." She gave him a small smile. "I hope you are right." The drive into San Antonio took about 40 minutes. Kyle kept the wagon at an easy pace while Samuel and Emily sat in the back, pointing out cows and horses and birds with the delight of children who had been cooped up for too long. Martha sat beside Kyle on the bench seat, her hands folded in her lap, not saying much but not seeming uncomfortable either. San Antonio was bustling even on a Sunday morning. They passed the Alamo, that famous old mission-turned fortress, and Kyle saw Martha looking at it with interest. "Have you been inside?" he asked. She shook her head. "We only arrived Friday night. We slept rough that first night, then found your stable last night. I will take you through sometime if you like. It is an important piece of Texas history." "I would like that." They arrived at the church, a simple white building with a tall steeple, just as other families were pulling up. Kyle helped Martha down from the wagon and lifted the children out, very aware of the curious looks they were getting from his neighbors. He nodded to a few people he knew, kept a protective hand on Martha's elbow, and guided his little group into the church. Pastor Williams was greeting people at the door, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes. He shook Kyle's hand warmly. "Kyle, good to see you. And who do we have here?" "Pastor, this is Martha Dawson and her children Samuel and Emily." "Martha, Pastor Williams." "Welcome to San Antonio," the pastor said, his smile genuine. "Will you be staying in the area?" "Yes, sir," Martha said quietly. "We are hoping to settle here." Kyle took a breath. "Actually, Pastor, I was hoping to speak with you after the service about performing a wedding ceremony. This afternoon, if possible." Pastor Williams's eyebrows rose, and Kyle saw understanding dawn in his eyes as he looked between Kyle and Martha. To his credit, the pastor did not ask a lot of questions or make any judgments. He simply nodded slowly. "I see. Well, certainly we can discuss it after the service. Please go find a seat." They sat near the back, and Kyle was grateful that most people were too focused on the service to stare openly at them. The sermon was about faith and new beginnings, and Kyle could not help but feel like it was meant specifically for him. Beside him, Martha sat with Samuel on one side and Emily on the other, her head bowed during the prayers, her lips moving silently. When the service ended, Kyle asked Martha to wait with the children while he spoke to the pastor. In the small office behind the altar, Pastor Williams settled behind his desk and gestured for Kyle to sit. "All right, son," the pastor said. "Tell me what is going on." Kyle explained, leaving nothing out. How he had found Martha and the children in his stable, how she was a widow with no family and nowhere to go, how he had offered her work, and then realized the only way to make it respectable was marriage. He did not try to pretty it up or make it sound more romantic than it was. This was a business arrangement, albeit one with good intentions on both sides. Pastor Williams listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Kyle finished, the pastor was quiet for a long moment. "This is highly unusual," he finally said. "I know. You barely know this woman." "I know. But you are certain this is what you want to do?" Kyle thought about Martha's face in the lantern light, about the way she protected her children, about the strength and dignity she maintained despite having nothing. He thought about his empty house and his lonely life and the way something had shifted in him the moment he saw her. "Yes," he said firmly. "I am certain," Pastor Williams sighed. "Then I will marry you. This afternoon at 2 o'clock back here at the church. You will need at least 2 witnesses." "I can find witnesses. I will also want to speak with Miss Dawson first, privately. I need to make sure she is entering into this of her own free will and understands what she is agreeing to." "Of course." Kyle stood and offered his hand. "Thank you, Pastor." When he returned to the sanctuary, Martha was sitting with the children, fending off curious questions from a couple of the town ladies. Kyle caught her eye and jerked his head toward the pastor's office. She excused herself and followed him, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store and could be trusted to keep them entertained for a few minutes. "He wants to talk to you," Kyle said. "Alone, to make sure you are doing this willingly." "I am," Martha said. "I know, but he needs to hear it from you." Kyle touched her arm briefly. "Take your time. I will be right out here." He watched her disappear into the office, then sat down in a pew to wait. Samuel climbed into his lap immediately, and Emily followed, and Kyle found himself with both children snuggled against him, looking at him with trust in their eyes. His throat tightened. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him like that. "Are you going to be our papa?" Emily asked, her voice soft. Kyle swallowed hard. "Would you like that?" She nodded vigorously. Samuel was more reserved, but he leaned his head against Kyle's chest and said, "Mama says you are a good man." "I will try to be," Kyle promised. "I will try to be the best father I can be to both of you." The office door opened and Martha emerged, her eyes a bit red but her expression calm. Pastor Williams followed her out and nodded to Kyle. 2 o'clock this afternoon. Do not be late." The next few hours passed in a blur. Kyle took Martha and the children to lunch at the hotel restaurant, where they ate roast chicken and potatoes while Kyle explained some of the basics of ranch life. Then he drove them to the general store and bought Martha a new dress, simple but clean and pretty, in a soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes. He bought new clothes for the children too, and proper shoes for all of them. Martha protested the expense, but Kyle was firm. "You are about to become my wife," he said. "Let me do this." She finally relented, and when she emerged from the changing room in the back of the store wearing the new blue dress with her hair freshly braided, Kyle felt his breath catch. She was beautiful. Not in a flashy way, but in a quiet, steady way that made him want to know everything about her. They returned to the church at 2 o'clock sharp. Kyle had managed to rope 2 of his ranch hands, Tom and Charlie, into serving as witnesses. Both men had given him strange looks, but agreed without asking too many questions. They stood now at the back of the church, hats in hands, while Pastor Williams prepared for the ceremony. Samuel and Emily sat in the front pew, watching with wide eyes as Kyle and Martha stood before the pastor. Kyle's hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants and took Martha's hand when the pastor told him to. Her fingers were cold in his, and he squeezed gently, trying to reassure her. The ceremony was simple and quick. Pastor Williams spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the responsibilities they were taking on, about being faithful and true to one another. When it came time for the vows, Kyle looked into Martha's eyes and said, "I promise to provide for you and your children, to protect you, and to treat you with respect and kindness all the days of my life." Martha's voice was steady but soft. "I promise to be a faithful wife, to care for your home, and to honor the commitment we are making today." "Do you have rings?" Pastor Williams asked. Kyle shook his head. "Not yet." "Then I pronounce you husband and wife. Kyle, you may kiss your bride." Kyle hesitated, suddenly awkward. He leaned in and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to Martha's lips, and then it was done. They were married. Kyle Sanders and Martha Dawson, now Martha Sanders, joined before God and witnesses on a Sunday afternoon in April of 1878. Tom and Charlie clapped politely. Samuel and Emily ran up to hug their mother and then, shyly, to hug Kyle too. He lifted them both, one in each arm, and felt something tight in his chest loosen just a fraction. "Congratulations," Pastor William said, shaking both their hands. "I will file the paperwork with the county clerk first thing tomorrow morning. You are officially married in the eyes of the law and the church." "Thank you, Pastor," Martha said, "for everything." They signed the marriage register, Tom and Charlie adding their signatures as witnesses, and then they were walking out into the bright afternoon sunshine as a family. Kyle loaded everyone into the wagon and drove them back to the ranch, his mind reeling. He had woken up yesterday morning a bachelor. He was going to bed tonight a married man with 2 children. Life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. Back at the ranch, Kyle unhitched the horses while Martha took the children inside to change out of their new clothes into something more practical. When he came in, Martha was already starting dinner, moving around his kitchen like she had been there for years instead of just one day. "Can I help?" Kyle asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "You can set the table, and maybe entertain the children while I cook. They are underfoot." Kyle rounded up Samuel and Emily and took them outside to see the animals. He showed them the chickens and let them gather eggs, introduced them to the horses, and explained how to approach without spooking them, and walked them out to see the cattle grazing in the distance. The children asked a million questions, and Kyle answered each one patiently, enjoying their curiosity and enthusiasm. When they came back for dinner, the house smelled amazing. Martha had made pot roast with vegetables and fresh bread, and there was even a pie for dessert. They ate together at the kitchen table, and for the first time in 3 years, Kyle's house felt like a home. After dinner, Kyle helped Martha wash the dishes while the children played in the sitting room. They worked in companionable silence, falling into an easy rhythm. When the last dish was dried and put away, Martha turned to him. "I want to thank you again," she said, "for all of this. I know it must seem strange marrying a complete stranger, but you have given my children a chance at a real life, and I will never forget that." "You do not need to thank me," Kyle said. "This benefits me too. I have been alone too long." "Your wife," Martha said hesitantly. "How long were you married?" "5 years. Sarah was her name. She died in childbirth and the baby with her." Even after 3 years, it hurt to say out loud. "I loved her very much. I want you to know that this arrangement, it is not because I am trying to replace her. No one could replace her." "I understand," Martha said softly. "My husband, James, he was a good man. Not perfect, but good. I mourned him deeply. This marriage between us, I know it is not the same thing, but maybe that is all right. Maybe we can build something different but still worthwhile." Kyle nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I would like that." They put the children to bed together, Kyle reading a story while Martha tucked the blankets around them. Then they stood in the hallway outside the spare room, suddenly awkward with each other. "Good night, Martha," Kyle said. "Good night, Kyle." He went to his room and she went to hers, and Kyle lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of other people in his house. It was strange but not unpleasant. For the first time since Sarah died, he felt like he might have a future worth looking forward to. The next few weeks fell into a routine. Kyle worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, breaking horses, and doing all the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Martha took over the household, cooking and cleaning and mending clothes, and tending the vegetable garden that had gone to weeds after Sarah died. The children thrived in the open air and sunshine, losing their pinched, hungry look and filling out into healthy, happy kids. Kyle and Martha circled each other politely, learning each other's habits and preferences. She made coffee strong the way he liked it without being told. He always hung his hat on the same peg so she would know where to find it. They had dinner together every night, the four of them around the kitchen table, and Kyle found himself looking forward to those meals more than anything else in his day. But there was a distance between them still, a careful formality that neither seemed willing to breach. They were partners, co-parents, housemates, but they were not quite husband and wife, not in the truest sense. That started to change about a month after the wedding. Kyle came in one evening to find Martha in the sitting room, crying quietly while the children slept. He froze in the doorway, unsure what to do. Sarah had cried sometimes, and he had always known how to comfort her, but Martha was different. They had boundaries and understanding. Still, he could not just leave her there in tears. "Martha," he said softly, "what is wrong?" She looked up, startled, and immediately tried to wipe her face. "Nothing, I am fine." "You are not fine." Kyle crossed the room and sat down beside her on the sofa, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to talk. "What happened?" She was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating whether to tell him. Finally, she said, "It would have been James's birthday today. I just started thinking about him, about everything we lost. And then I felt guilty because I am here, and I am happy in this new life, and it feels like I am forgetting him." "You are not forgetting him," Kyle said firmly. "Moving forward does not mean forgetting. It just means living." "Do you still think about Sarah?" Martha asked. "Every day." "But it does not hurt like it used to. Time helps. And having things to focus on, like the ranch, like you and the children." He took a chance and reached out to cover her hand with his. "You are allowed to be happy, Martha. James would want that for you." She turned her hand over so their palms were touching. "Do you think we could ever be more than just a practical arrangement? Really married, I mean?" Kyle's heart thudded. "I would like that. I have been hoping for that, actually, but I did not want to push." "You said you wanted to keep things separate." "I did. I did." She laughed shakily. "I am not making sense. What I mean is, I like you, Kyle. You are a good man. You have been so kind to me and my children, and I think maybe I could fall in love with you given time, if you felt the same way." "I already am falling in love with you," Kyle said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "I watch you with the children, and I see how much you love them. I see how hard you work, how you never complain. I see your strength and your grace, and it takes my breath away. I know this marriage started as a convenience, but Martha, I want it to be real." She looked at him with tears still shining in her eyes. "So do I." Kyle cupped her face in his hands, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, he leaned in and kissed her. Not the brief peck from their wedding day, but a real kiss, gentle but with promise behind it. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and Kyle felt the last walls between them start to crumble. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Martha smiled. "That was nice." "Yes, it was." Kyle rested his forehead against hers. "We will go slow. There is no rush. We have all the time in the world." "All the time in the world," she repeated softly. They sat together on the sofa for a long time that night, holding hands and talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. It was the kind of conversation people usually had before getting married, but for them, it came after. Kyle learned that Martha had grown up in Missouri, that she loved to read but rarely had time for it anymore, that she had always wanted to learn to ride a horse but had never had the chance. Martha learned that Kyle had built this ranch from nothing over the course of 10 years, that he had a brother in Colorado he had not seen in 5 years, that he secretly wrote poetry sometimes, but never showed it to anyone. By the time they went to their separate rooms that night, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer just going through the motions of marriage. They were building something real. Over the next few months, they grew closer. Kyle taught Martha to ride, patiently guiding her through the basics until she could canter across the pasture with confidence. She taught him to cook more than just basic beans and bacon, and his kitchen began to smell of spices and herbs he had never even heard of before. They worked together on projects around the ranch, repairing the chicken coop, planting a new garden, whitewashing the barn. The children flourished. Samuel started helping Kyle with small ranch tasks, learning to curry the horses and feed the chickens and repair simple equipment. Emily shadowed her mother everywhere, learning to sew and bake and tend the house. But they also ran wild in the best way, climbing trees and catching frogs and playing elaborate imaginary games in the barn. Kyle and Martha still slept in separate rooms, but the distance between those rooms felt less and less important as the summer wore on. They kissed goodnight at the end of each day, lingering in the hallway with their arms around each other. They held hands during dinner. Kyle would come up behind Martha while she was cooking and wrap his arms around her waist, and she would lean back against him with a contented sigh. It was Martha who finally breached the last barrier. In late August, on a sweltering night when the heat made sleeping difficult, Kyle woke to find her standing in his doorway. "Martha," he sat up, instantly alert. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said softly. "Nothing is wrong, I just do not want to sleep alone anymore." Kyle pulled back the covers in answer, and she crossed the room and climbed into bed beside him. He gathered her into his arms, and she pressed her face against his chest with a sigh of contentment. "Are you sure?" Kyle asked, stroking her hair. "I am sure. I love you, Kyle. I want to be your wife in every way." "I love you too," he said, and meant it with everything in him. They made love slowly and tenderly, taking time to learn each other, to give and receive pleasure. Afterward, Martha curled against Kyle's side, her head on his shoulder, and he held her close with a feeling of rightness settling over him. "No regrets?" he asked. "Not a single one." From that night on, they shared a room. The spare bedroom became Samuel's room, and Emily got the third bedroom, and the house rearranged itself around their new family structure. Kyle could hardly believe how much his life had changed in the space of 4 months. He had gone from a lonely widower to a husband and father with a house full of laughter and love. As fall arrived and the weather started to cool, Martha made an announcement over breakfast one morning. "I think I am pregnant." Kyle nearly choked on his coffee. Samuel and Emily looked up with interest, not quite understanding but picking up on the importance of the moment. "Are you sure?" Kyle asked when he could speak. Martha nodded, a shy smile on her face. "Pretty sure. I have been feeling sick in the mornings and I am late. All the signs are there." Kyle got up and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. A baby, their baby, a symbol of everything they had built together. "That is wonderful news." "You are happy?" Martha asked. "I am thrilled." He kissed her forehead, then her lips. "This is the best news I have heard in years." "Are we getting a baby?" Emily asked, her voice excited. "Yes, sweetheart," Martha said, turning to include the children in the conversation. "Next spring you will have a little brother or sister." Samuel's face lit up. "Really? A real baby?" "A real baby," Kyle confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. They went into town the next day to see the doctor, who confirmed what Martha had suspected. She was about 2 months along, which meant the baby would arrive sometime in April. Kyle felt a superstitious dread at that news, remembering what had happened to Sarah. But the doctor assured them that Martha was healthy and strong, and there was no reason to expect complications. Still, Kyle worried. He fussed over Martha constantly, trying to get her to rest more, to let him do the heavy work around the house. She tolerated his hovering for about a week before sitting him down for a serious talk. "I know you are worried," she said, taking his hands in hers. "I know what happened with Sarah. But I am not Sarah, and this baby is not that baby. You have to trust that everything will be all right." "I am trying," Kyle said. "But if something happened to you, Martha, I do not think I could survive it. Nothing is going to happen to me. I am strong and I am healthy, and women have babies every day." She pressed his hand to her stomach, which was just starting to show a slight curve. "This baby is a blessing, our blessing. Try to focus on the joy, not the fear." Kyle tried. He really did. But as Martha's pregnancy progressed through fall and into winter, the fear lurked in the back of his mind. He threw himself into ranch work to distract himself, preparing for the spring calving season, repairing equipment, cutting firewood for the winter. Tom and Charlie, his ranch hands, noticed the change in him but did not comment beyond a few concerned looks. Christmas came, and Kyle made sure it was special. He cut down a tree and Martha decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that the children made. He bought toys for Samuel and Emily, a train set and a doll respectively, and a beautiful shawl for Martha. She gave him a new saddle she had been secretly saving for, and he was touched beyond words by her thoughtfulness. They spent Christmas Day in their own little world, just the four of them, eating a feast that Martha had prepared and playing games by the fire. That night, after the children were in bed, Martha and Kyle sat together watching the firelight dance across the walls. "This is my best Christmas ever," Martha said softly. Kyle kissed her temple. "Mine too." Winter passed in a blur of cold nights and warm fires. Martha's belly grew round and full, and Kyle felt the baby kick under his hand when he held her at night. Samuel and Emily were excited about the coming addition, though Emily sometimes worried that they would not love her as much once the new baby arrived. Kyle and Martha reassured her constantly that they had more than enough love for all their children. In early March, they made a trip into San Antonio to stock up on supplies before the baby came. While there, they ran into Pastor Williams, who was delighted to see them. "Look at you," he said, beaming at Martha's pregnant belly. "I had my doubts about your unusual arrangement, but I can see now that God's hand was in it. You two look very happy." "We are," Kyle said, wrapping his arm around Martha's shoulders. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "And the children, thriving," Martha said. "This turned out to be the best possible home for them." "For all of us," Kyle corrected. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Kyle noticed a man watching them from across the street. There was something familiar about him, but Kyle could not place it. The man started walking toward them, and as he got closer, recognition dawned. "James Dawson," the man said. "I cannot believe it. I heard you had died." Martha went very still beside Kyle. "Robert." Kyle looked between them, confused. "You know this man?" "He is my husband's brother," Martha said quietly. "James's younger brother." Robert was staring at Martha with an expression of disbelief. "We got word that James had died, but then you just disappeared. No one knew where you had gone. I have been looking for you for months." "I needed to start over," Martha said, her voice steady. "There was nothing left for me in Dallas." Robert's gaze dropped to her pregnant belly and his expression darkened. "I see. You did not waste any time moving on." Kyle stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Martha. "Watch your tone." "Who are you?" Robert demanded. "Kyle Sanders, Martha's husband." "Her husband?" Robert's voice rose. "James has been dead less than a year, and she is already remarried and pregnant. What kind of woman does that?" "The kind who had to survive," Kyle said, his voice hard. "The kind who had 2 children to feed and no way to do it. Do not you dare judge her when you do not know what she has been through." "I know she was my brother's wife," Robert shot back. Those children are my nephew and niece. By rights, they should be with family. Martha's hand found Kyle's, gripping tight. They are with family. Kyle is their father now. He is not their father. He is a stranger you married out of convenience. Robert took a step closer. I want to see them, Samuel and Emily. I have a right to know my brother's children. Kyle felt Martha trembling beside him and knew this was bad. Whatever Robert's intentions, they were not good. I think you should leave now. I will not leave, not without seeing those children. They are not here, Martha said. They are back at the ranch. Then I will come to the ranch. Robert's jaw was set in a stubborn line. You cannot keep me from them. Before Kyle could respond, Sheriff Matthews appeared, drawn by the raised voices. Is there a problem here, folks? Kyle quickly explained the situation. Sheriff Matthews, an older man who had known Kyle for years, frowned at Robert. Sir, if Mrs. Sanders does not want you around her family, you need to respect that. She is not Sanders, she is Dawson, Robert insisted. And those children are Dawson's too. I have legal rights here. Actually, you do not, the sheriff said mildly. Mrs. Sanders is legally married to Kyle Sanders. The children live in his household. Unless you want to file some kind of formal custody claim, which would require a lawyer and a judge, you have no legal standing here at all. Robert's face reddened. This is not over. Those children deserve to know their real family. We are their real family, Kyle said firmly. Now leave us alone, or the sheriff will escort you out of town. Robert glared at them for a long moment, then turned and stalked away. Kyle felt Martha sag against him in relief. Thank you, Sheriff, Kyle said. No problem. But Kyle, if he does come around causing trouble, you let me know immediately. Understood. Understood. They finished loading the wagon in tense silence and drove home without speaking. Samuel and Emily ran out to greet them when they arrived, and Martha plastered on a smile for their benefit, but Kyle could see the worry in her eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, they talked about it. Martha was frightened that Robert would try to take Samuel and Emily away. Kyle reassured her that he would never let that happen, but privately he was worried too. The law could be unpredictable, especially when it came to children. If Robert did file a formal claim, there was a chance, however small, that a judge might side with him as blood family. We will fight it if we have to, Kyle said. I will hire the best lawyer in San Antonio. We will show any judge that those children are happy and well cared for here, that this is their home. What if it is not enough? Martha whispered. What if they take them away? They will not. I promise you, Martha, I will not let anyone take our children. Robert did not come to the ranch, but he did not leave San Antonio either. Kyle heard through town gossip that James's brother was staying at the hotel and asking questions about the Sanders family. It made Kyle nervous, but there was nothing he could do except wait and see what Robert would do next. In mid-April, as the wildflowers began blooming across the Texas hills, Martha went into labor. It started in the early morning hours, and Kyle immediately sent Tom racing into town to fetch the doctor and the midwife. He stayed with Martha, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Samuel and Emily were scared by their mother's cries of pain, so Kyle had Charlie take them into town to stay with Mrs. Henderson for the day. He did not want them to witness anything frightening. The labor was long and difficult. Martha was strong, but the baby seemed reluctant to come. As the hours stretched on, Kyle felt his fear growing. He could not lose her, not Martha, not after everything they had been through, everything they had built together. You can do this, he told her, over and over. You are the strongest woman I know. You can do this. I am trying, she gasped between contractions. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the baby came. A boy, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Martha's arms, and Kyle felt tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," Martha said, her voice exhausted but full of wonder. "He is perfect." Kyle kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "You are amazing, you did it." They named him Matthew Kyle Sanders, and he was the most precious thing Kyle had ever seen besides his other children. When Samuel and Emily came home the next day and met their new brother, their faces lit up with joy. Emily immediately wanted to hold him, and Samuel asked a dozen questions about where babies came from and why Matthew was so small. For the next few weeks, life revolved around the new baby. Matthew was colicky and did not sleep well, which meant neither did Kyle or Martha. But even exhausted and running on no sleep, Kyle was happier than he had ever been. His house was full of noise and chaos and love, and it was everything he had never dared hope for after Sarah died. Then, 6 weeks after Matthew was born, Robert Dawson showed up at the ranch with a lawyer and a sheriff's deputy. Kyle was in the barn when he heard the commotion. He came running out to find Martha on the porch, the baby in her arms, facing down Robert and 2 other men. "What is going on here?" Kyle demanded. The lawyer, a thin man with spectacles, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sanders, my name is Henry Morrison. I represent Mr. Robert Dawson in the matter of custody of the minor children Samuel and Emily Dawson." Kyle felt cold all over. "There is no custody matter. Those children have a home, they have parents. They have a mother who abandoned her husband's family and remarried with unseemly haste," Robert said, "and a stepfather who is essentially a stranger. Your Honor, I am their blood relative, their father's brother. I can provide them with a proper home and connection to their real family." "I am their real family," Kyle said, his voice shaking with anger. "I have raised them for a year. I am the only father they remember." "That does not change the fact that you have no legal claim to them," Morrison said. "Mr. Dawson has filed a petition with the court to assume guardianship. Judge Carson has issued a temporary order granting Mr. Dawson visitation rights, pending a full custody hearing." Martha made a sound like a wounded animal. "No, you cannot take them." "We are not taking them today," Morrison said, his tone slightly gentler. "But Mr. Dawson has the right to spend time with them, to get to know them. The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. At that time, the judge will decide permanent placement." Kyle wanted to argue, to fight, to physically throw these men off his property, but the deputy's presence made it clear that would only make things worse. "Fine. Robert can visit with the children, here on my property, supervised by me or my wife. That is the only way this happens." "That is not acceptable," Robert started, but Morrison held up a hand. "Actually, that is reasonable. Mr. Dawson, you will have supervised visitation here, twice a week for 2 hours until the custody hearing. Mr. and Mrs. Sanders, you are to allow these visits to occur without interference." It was a nightmare. Kyle watched helplessly as Samuel and Emily were brought out to meet their uncle. The children were confused and frightened, clinging to Martha. Robert tried to be warm and friendly, but it was clear the children did not remember him and did not want to be near him. After the men left, Kyle held Martha while she cried. Matthew wailed in sympathy, and Samuel and Emily clung to both of them, asking if they had to leave. "No," Kyle said fiercely. "No, you are not going anywhere. This is your home. I am going to fight this with everything I have." He hired his own lawyer, a tough woman named Abigail Thompson, who had a reputation for winning difficult cases. She interviewed Kyle and Martha extensively, took statements from Pastor Williams and Sheriff Matthews and Mrs. Henderson, and built a case showing that the children were thriving in the Sanders household. The visitations with Robert were tense and uncomfortable. He would show up twice a week and spend 2 hours trying to bond with Samuel and Emily. The children were polite but distant, clearly not understanding why this stranger was suddenly in their lives. After each visit, Emily would have nightmares, and Samuel would cling to Kyle and ask if they really had to leave. "No one is making you leave," Kyle assured them, over and over. "You are my children. I love you. We are going to fight to keep our family together." The custody hearing finally arrived in early June. Kyle and Martha dressed in their best clothes and drove into San Antonio with Abigail Thompson. The courtroom was small and stuffy, and Judge Carson was an older man with a stern face that gave nothing away. Robert's lawyer went first, painting a picture of Martha as an irresponsible mother who had abandoned her late husband's family and rushed into an inappropriate marriage. He claimed the children would benefit from being raised by their blood relative, connected to their father's heritage. Then, Abigail stood up. She called Pastor Williams to testify about finding Martha and the children destitute and how Kyle had stepped up to provide for them. She called Sheriff Matthews to talk about the Sanders family's sterling reputation in the community. She called Mrs. Henderson, who testified that she had never seen healthier, happier children than Samuel and Emily. Finally, she called Kyle to the stand. "Mr. Sanders," Abigail said, "tell the court about the night you found Martha and her children." Kyle did, describing how they had been sleeping in his stable, hungry and desperate. He explained his decision to offer help, to make the marriage legal and give the children a home. He talked about the last year, about teaching Samuel to ride and reading bedtime stories to Emily and building a family from nothing. "You love those children?" Abigail asked. "With all my heart," Kyle said, his voice breaking. "They are my children in every way that matters. I would die for them. And if the court rules against you, if Robert Dawson is granted custody, then it would destroy all of us. Those children belong with us. With their mother and their baby brother and me, we are a family. You cannot just tear that apart." When Abigail was done, Robert's lawyer cross-examined Kyle, trying to paint him as someone who had taken advantage of a desperate woman. But Kyle held firm, refusing to let the lawyer twist his words. Then it was Martha's turn. She testified about the impossibility of her situation after James died, about the lack of support from his family, about her desperate need to provide for her children. She talked about Kyle's kindness and goodness, about how he had become a true father to Samuel and Emily. "Do you believe your children would be better off with Robert Dawson?" Morrison asked her. "No," Martha said firmly. "They barely know him. He is a stranger to them. Kyle is their father. He is the man who tucks them in at night and bandages their scrapes and teaches them right from wrong. Biology does not make you a parent. Love does." The final witnesses were Samuel and Emily themselves. Judge Carson had them brought into his chambers privately, without the lawyers or parents present, so he could talk to them. Kyle waited in agony for an hour, not knowing what his children were saying, praying they would be able to articulate what they wanted. When everyone was called back into the courtroom, Judge Carson looked tired. He shuffled through his papers for a moment, then looked up at the assembled people. "This has been a difficult case," he said. "On the one hand, Mr. Dawson has a legitimate claim as blood family. On the other hand, it is clear that these children have bonded with Mr. and Mrs. Sanders and consider them to be their parents." Kyle held Martha's hand so tight he was probably hurting her, but he could not let go. Everything hung on the judge's next words. "I have spoken with Samuel and Emily privately," Judge Carson continued. "They were both very clear about what they want. They want to stay with Kyle and Martha Sanders." They are happy in that home. They feel safe and loved." He paused. "While I understand Mr. Dawson's desire to maintain a connection with his brother's children, I cannot in good conscience remove them from a loving, stable home where they are thriving. Petition for custody is denied. Samuel and Emily Dawson will remain in the permanent custody of Kyle and Martha Sanders." Kyle felt all the air rush out of his lungs. Martha burst into tears beside him. Abigail was smiling, and across the room, Robert looked devastated. "However," the judge said, raising his voice over the noise, "I am granting Mr. Dawson limited visitation rights. Once a month, supervised, he may visit with the children. I believe it is in their best interest to maintain some connection with their father's family, even if they do not live with him." Kyle could live with that. Once a month, supervised, he could manage. As long as his children were staying with him, everything else was negotiable. They left the courthouse in a daze. Tom and Charlie were waiting with the children in the wagon, and when Samuel and Emily saw Kyle and Martha's faces, they started cheering. Kyle swept them both into his arms, holding them tight. "You are staying with us," he said, his voice choked. "Forever. You are ours." "We know, Papa," Emily said, using the name she had started calling him months ago. "We told the judge we wanted to stay with you." Kyle looked at Martha over the children's heads, and they shared a moment of pure relief and gratitude. They had won. Their family was intact. That night, after the children were asleep and Matthew was down in his cradle, Kyle and Martha sat on the porch together watching the stars come out. "I cannot believe it is over," Martha said softly. "We almost lost them," Kyle said. "When Morrison showed up with that petition, I thought my heart would stop. But we did not lose them. They are ours." Martha turned to him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "When I was sleeping in that stable a year ago, I never imagined my life could turn out like this. I thought we were at the end, that there was no hope left. And then you found us." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Kyle said. "Finding you. You ever regret it?" "Marrying me so quickly, taking on 2 children and all the complications that came with it," Kyle pulled her close. "Not for 1 second. You and those kids, you are the reason I get up in the morning. You are my whole world." "I love you," Martha said. "I know this marriage started as a practical thing, but Kyle, I love you with everything I am." "I love you too." Kyle kissed her long and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, he added, "I think we should make it official. Adopt Samuel and Emily. Change their last names to Sanders, so there is never any question about who they belong to." "Can we do that?" Martha asked. "I will ask Abigail, but I think so, yes. And I want to do it soon, before Robert changes his mind about fighting." They did adopt the children, going through the legal process to make Kyle their official father in the eyes of the law. Samuel and Emily Sanders, it said on the new birth certificates. Kyle had them framed and hung them in his office, proof that his family was real and permanent. Robert did visit once a month as the judge had ordered. The visits remained awkward, but over time, Samuel and Emily relaxed around him. He was their uncle, Kyle explained, someone who had known their first father. It was good to have that connection, but it did not change anything about their family now. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kyle and Martha's marriage deepened with every passing month. They had their disagreements, of course. Martha thought Kyle was too permissive with the children, and Kyle thought Martha worried too much. But they always talked things through, always came back to their foundation of love and respect for each other. Matthew grew from a colicky baby into a toddler with his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Samuel turned into a fine young horseman, able to ride and rope almost as well as Kyle by the time he was 8. Emily developed a passion for reading, and could often be found curled up in the hayloft with a book, lost in stories of far-off places. On their 2-year anniversary, Kyle took Martha into town for dinner at the nicest restaurant in San Antonio. They left the children with Tom and Charlie, who had become like uncles to the kids over the years. "Can you believe it has only been 2 years?" Martha asked over dessert. "It feels like you have been my husband forever." "Feels like yesterday that I found you in my stable," Kyle said. "Scared to death and doing your best not to show it. I was terrified, but also hopeful, even though I did not want to admit it. There was something about you even from that first moment, a steadiness. I knew I could trust you." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You saved us, Kyle. Not just by giving us a home, but by loving us, by being the kind of man worth loving back." "You saved me too," Kyle said. "I was just going through the motions before you came along, working the ranch, existing but not really living. You brought life back into my world." They walked home in the moonlight, arm in arm, talking about everything and nothing. When they got home, the children were asleep, and the ranch hands had gone to their bunkhouse. Kyle and Martha went to bed and made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating 2 years of marriage and looking forward to all the years ahead. More children came. Another son, whom they named Daniel, arrived when Matthew was 2. Then a daughter, Grace, 2 years after that. Kyle's house was full to bursting with children and noise and laughter, and he loved every chaotic minute of it. Samuel grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch almost as much as Kyle did. Kyle taught him everything he knew about ranching, about managing cattle and land and finances. When Samuel was 18, Kyle made him a full partner in the operation, legally transferring half ownership to his adopted son. Emily's love of books led her to become a teacher. She studied with the schoolmaster in San Antonio and then took over the one-room schoolhouse on the outskirts of town. She was patient and kind with her students, and everyone agreed she was the best teacher the county had ever had. Matthew and Daniel and Grace grew up wild and free, running the ranch like it was their personal playground. They rode horses before they could walk properly, helped with the cattle drives, and generally made Kyle and Martha's lives both exhausting and wonderful. On their 10th anniversary, Kyle and Martha took a trip alone together for the first time since they had married. Samuel was 20 and more than capable of managing the ranch for a week. They traveled to Galveston and stayed in a hotel on the beach, walking along the shore and talking about the life they had built together. "You ever think about how we met?" Martha asked one evening as they watched the sunset over the water. "All the time," Kyle said. "How scared you were, how brave, how you trusted me even though you had no reason to." "I had every reason to trust you. You are the most trustworthy man I have ever known." Martha leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think my life ended when James died. In a way, it did. That life, that version of me, she did end. But a new life began, a better life, honestly. Is that wrong of me to say?" "It is not wrong. It is honest." Kyle kissed the top of her head. "James was a good man and you loved him. But what we have, Martha, what we built together from nothing, that is special too. You are allowed to acknowledge that." "I love you so much," Martha said. "More than I thought possible. You are my whole heart, Kyle Sanders, and you are mine." They spent the week in Galveston like newlyweds, holding hands and talking and making love, and simply enjoying each other's company without the constant demands of children and ranch work. It was wonderful, but by the end of the week, they were both ready to go home. When they arrived back at the ranch, all 5 children rushed out to greet them, talking over each other about everything that had happened while they were gone. The mare had foaled, Samuel had mended the north fence, Emily had a new beau who was coming to dinner on Sunday, Matthew had caught the biggest fish in the creek, Daniel had lost a tooth, and Grace had learned to braid her own hair. Kyle looked at Martha over the sea of their children, and they shared a smile. This was home. This was family. This was everything they had never dared hope for that night in the stable 10 years ago. More years passed. Kyle's hair went gray at the temples, then all over. Martha developed laugh lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life well lived. Their children grew up and started families of their own. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and gave them 3 grandchildren. Emily married her schoolteacher Bo and had twin boys. Matthew and Daniel went into business together, buying a ranch of their own and working it side by side. Grace, their youngest, married a lawyer in San Antonio and gave them 4 more grandchildren. The ranch house that had once felt too big and empty for just Kyle was now regularly overflowing with children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and life. Kyle built additions onto the house to accommodate everyone when they visited. Martha cooked huge meals and told stories about the old days. The grandchildren loved hearing about how Grandpa Kyle had found Grandma Martha and Uncle Samuel and Aunt Emily sleeping in the stable and married Grandma the very next day. "That is the most romantic story ever," granddaughter Lily declared when she was about 10. "Like a fairy tale." "It is not a fairy tale," Martha said, smiling at Kyle across the crowded dinner table. "It is better, because it is real." Kyle raised his glass of water in a toast, to real life, to family, to love that lasts. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Kyle felt a swell of contentment so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. This was what he had built. Not just a successful ranch, though it was that. Not just a large family, though he had that too. But a legacy of love, of people who cared for each other, who supported each other, who knew they belonged together. On a warm evening in early spring, 25 years after that fateful night in the stable, Kyle and Martha sat together on their porch watching the sunset. They were older now, moving a bit slower, but still strong and healthy. The ranch was thriving under Samuel's management, and their other children were all successful and happy. Life had been good to them. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not stopped at the stable that night?" Kyle asked. "If I had gone straight to the house and not checked on the mare?" "I do not like to think about it," Martha admitted. "We would have left in the morning and kept going. I do not know where we would have ended up, probably nowhere good. I would never have known what I was missing." Kyle took her hand and brought it to his lips. "You were my second chance, Martha. My chance to have a family again, to love again. You gave me back my life." "And you gave me back mine," Martha said softly. "You showed me that endings can become beginnings. That you can build something beautiful from desperation and fear." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. The sounds of the ranch settled around them, familiar and comforting. Cattle lowing in the distance. Horses nickering in the stable, the creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. "I would not change a single thing," Kyle said finally. "Not one moment of the last 25 years. Every joy, every challenge, every day with you has been a gift. Even when I made you eat that terrible stew I tried to make in our first year," Martha teased. Kyle laughed. "Even then. Though I will admit that was rough. You are a good man, Kyle Sanders, the best man I have ever known. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me and my children a home." "Our children," Kyle corrected gently. "They were always our children from that very first day." "Our children," Martha agreed. "Our family, our life." As the stars began to appear overhead, Kyle pulled Martha close and held her, thinking about all the years behind them and all the years still ahead. They had built something remarkable together, something that would last long after they were gone. A family bound not just by blood but by choice, by love, by the decision to face life's challenges together. The stable where it had all begun was still standing, weathered but solid. Sometimes Kyle would go out there and stand in the spot where he had first seen Martha curled up with Samuel and Emily, and he would marvel at how a single moment could change everything. How offering help to a stranger could become the best decision of his life. Their love story was not the conventional kind. It had started with desperation and practicality, with a marriage of convenience hastily arranged to satisfy propriety. But over the years, it had grown into something deep and true and lasting. They had fallen in love slowly, learning each other day by day, building trust and intimacy and partnership. It was not a fairy tale, as Martha had said. It was better. It was real. And on that April night 25 years ago, when Kyle Sanders had found Martha Dawson sleeping in his stable with 2 small children and decided to marry her that Sunday morning, he had set in motion a chain of events that would bring him more joy than he had ever dreamed possible. He had found his family, his purpose, his heart. He had found home. That was the real miracle of their story, Kyle thought as he held his wife under the stars. Not the quick wedding or the practical arrangement, but what grew from those humble beginnings. A love that sustained them through hardship and celebrated with them through triumph. A family that welcomed everyone and turned strangers into kin. A life lived fully and well, with no regrets and no looking back. Kyle and Martha stayed on the ranch for the rest of their days, watching their children and grandchildren thrive, working the land they loved, and cherishing each moment they had together. When Kyle was in his 70s, he finally started teaching his grandsons all the things he had taught Samuel years before, passing down the knowledge of the land and the animals, the rhythms of ranch life that had sustained their family for so long. Martha quilted with her daughters and granddaughters, teaching them the patterns and stitches she had learned as a girl. She told them stories about the old days, about meeting Kyle and building a life from nothing. Never be afraid to start over, she would tell them. Never be afraid to accept help when it is offered with a good heart. Their love remained strong even as their bodies weakened with age. They still held hands, still kissed goodnight, still found reasons to laugh together every day. Friends and neighbors often remarked that they had never seen a couple so devoted to each other, so clearly still in love after all those years. "What is your secret?" young couples would ask them. "How do you make love last?" Kyle and Martha would exchange a glance, communicating in that silent way long married couples develop. "Choose each other," Martha would say. "Every day choose each other, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. And remember why you fell in love in the first place," Kyle would add. "Remember that you are partners, not adversaries. You are on the same team. And never go to bed angry," Martha would finish with a smile. "Always talk it out even if it takes all night." It was simple advice, but it had served them well for decades. Their marriage was built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and a shared commitment to their family. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs together, and grown old together with grace and love. When Kyle was 78 and Martha 76, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they had ever known. The house and yard were packed with people, 3 generations of family and friends who had been touched by Kyle and Martha's love story. Pastor Williams, now retired and quite elderly himself, stood up to give a toast. 50 years ago, I married these 2 people under somewhat unusual circumstances. Kyle came to me and said he wanted to marry a woman he had just met, a widow with 2 small children. I had my doubts, I will admit, but I married them, and I am so glad I did. Because what Kyle and Martha have built together is nothing short of miraculous. A family bound by love, a home filled with joy, a legacy that will endure for generations. To Kyle and Martha Sanders, everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Kyle stood up, pulling Martha to her feet beside him. "Thank you all for coming," Kyle said, his voice still strong despite his years. "Martha and I have been blessed beyond measure. We have 5 wonderful children, 18 grandchildren, and so far, 6 great-grandchildren. We have this beautiful ranch that has sustained us and provided for our family. But most of all, we have each other. 50 years ago, I found this woman sleeping in my stable, and I made the crazy decision to marry her the next day. It was the best decision I ever made. Martha, you are my heart. My love, my everything. Here is to 50 more years." Martha laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know if we have 50 more years in us, my love, but whatever time we have left, I want to spend it with you." They kissed to thunderous applause, and Kyle felt the same rush of love he had felt the first time he kissed her properly, all those years ago. Some things never changed. Some things never faded. True love was one of them. The party went late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Kyle and Martha danced together, moving slowly but still in sync, still connected after all these years. Their children watched with misty eyes, knowing they were witnessing something special. A love that had lasted, a marriage that had thrived. A testament to the power of choosing each other, day after day, year after year. As the sun set on their 50th anniversary, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold, Kyle and Martha stood together on their porch one more time. The party was winding down, grandchildren were falling asleep on couches and floors, and the evening was settling into that peaceful quietness that comes after a day well spent. "Thank you," Martha said softly, "for all of this, for our family, for our life, for loving me." "Thank you for trusting me," Kyle replied, "for taking a chance on a strange rancher who proposed marriage after knowing you for 2 hours, for building this life with me, for being my partner in every way." They stood together as the stars came out, just as they had done thousands of times before. And Kyle knew with absolute certainty that finding Martha sleeping in his stable with 2 small children and marrying her that Sunday morning was the single best thing he had ever done. It had given him everything: purpose, family, love, home. Their story was not a fairy tale, it was better. It was real and messy and beautiful and true. And it was theirs, now and forever.